Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, January the 1st, 2025. Happy New Year! And in this video, I will of course be looking at what's happening today, January the 1st, 2025. And I will also be looking a little bit at 2025 in a general sense. I'm not going to go on and on about 2025, but I'm going to be looking at some of the main features of the year, but in a very general sense. Looking at perhaps Saturn and Neptune moving into Aries, Uranus starting to move into Gemini. So that's the general picture of the video. I'm not thinking this video is going to be particularly long. Anyway, let's look at what's happening today, which is Wednesday, January the 1st, 2025, and have to give my usual reminder that if you enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it, and if you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. Anyway, let's look at what's happening today, this first day of January. So here is the chart for January the 1st, Wednesday, January the 1st, 2025, noon set for New York. So you can see that the moon is in Aquarius. So we had that new moon in Capricorn, and so we've now got a waxing moon. And so now the moon is in a different sign from the sun in Capricorn, moon in Aquarius. And that's kind of a good thing, isn't it? When the moon is in the same sign as the sun, it's a little bit overwhelmed. It's perhaps combust if it's very close to the sun. And now that the moon is in Aquarius, there's a little bit of objectivity. We can start to see the wood for the trees. And at the same time, the moon is making a conjunction to Pluto. So moon conjunct Pluto in Aquarius, that can be quite intense. And it may be just because it's New Year's Day, having moon conjunct Pluto in Aquarius, it does make us think about the future. What does it actually bring? We may get insights about Pluto in Aquarius and the changes that this placement is going to create for us, or maybe not for us, but maybe for the world in general. Now, on a more sort of personal level, moon conjunct Pluto, I suppose it might be that there are some things that we feel we want to keep hidden, maybe, or it could be quite intense. Although it is in Aquarius, it's not like it's moon conjunct Pluto in Scorpio. It's more in the realm of ideas, and perhaps wanting to keep our ideas to ourselves, being careful who we reveal things to. Now, the moon, when it makes a conjunction to Pluto, it makes an opposition to Mars. And so, we've had this Mars-Pluto opposition starting to form. This is about Mars moving retrograde onto an opposition of Pluto. So this aspect happens in a couple of days' time, the Mars-Pluto aspect, but the moon brings it all together. And so you could say that it is a Mars-Pluto day. And so the moon is not just conjunct Pluto, it's opposition Mars. And so moon opposition Mars can be quite a tense combination. It can be somewhat stressful. It can be quite angry. And so some of us might have strong feelings, particularly as this opposition is in fixed signs. Moon Pluto conjunction in Aquarius, fixed sign, opposition Mars, Mars in Leo, fixed sign. So it may be a situation where everyone is holding on to very tightly to what they believe in, and it may be difficult to get people to compromise. It kind of depends what you're doing today. I mean, if you're spending today alone, then it's not really such an issue. But if you're with people and things are planned, then that might be a bit of a problem. Though I suppose with Mars opposition Pluto, I mean, it is Mars, I suppose, and Moon's involved, so I suppose We don't want to do anything careless. We don't want to be too hasty, and we shouldn't be in too much of a hurry. So really, the day is dominated by that configuration: Moon conjunct Pluto opposition Mars. Geocentrically, there aren't really any other aspects. I mean, at the beginning of the day, just before the Moon moves into Aquarius in late Capricorn, the Moon makes a sextile to Neptune, but that is a very gentle aspect. It's quite a sensitive aspect, and I wonder how much we're going to actually be able to feel it. So that's the situation in New York at noon. Moon at 3 degrees Aquarius. If you look at the situation in Australasia, in Sydney, Australia, the Moon is at 24 Capricorn at noon. So if you are in Australasia, I think that it's possibly going to be more of a Moon in Capricorn day. And I think that Mars-Pluto opposition, which I was talking about, that Moon conjunct Pluto, Moon opposition Mars, is not necessarily going to be such a big feature. That's going to be more about sort of late in the day. But still, I mean, the Moon is making a conjunction to Pluto. It is sort of making an opposition to Mars, but it's somewhat distant, and you might not feel it until this evening. So as far as the heliocentric picture is concerned, let's just switch the coordinate systems. So from a heliocentric view, we have Mercury quincunx Uranus. So Mercury quincunx Uranus, is about what we say, what we try to communicate, and there may be a certain uneasiness in the way people communicate, and maybe that's sort of connected with the fact that geocentrically we've got Moon opposition Mars, Moon opposition Pluto. So that might be one feature of it. And I suppose what might be important today is a certain sense of discipline. And Mars in Cancer, this is heliocentric, of course, Mars in Cancer is making a trine to Saturn in Pisces. So with Mars trine Saturn, that might mean that there is an attempt to control oneself, discipline one's energy, make sure one doesn't take things too far. Though, of course, you might just see that Mars trine Saturn as just a Mars-Saturn contact. You might just want to forget the fact that it's a trine. And I suppose with that Mars trine Saturn, it may be that at some level there is a certain amount of frustration. I think because it's a trine, we're going to be able to deal with that frustration, but it just may not be possible to get things done as quickly as we would like them to. So we perhaps should be a little bit patient if at all possible. So I mean, that's the broad picture heliocentrically, and now I want to consider things from the perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, January the 1st, 2025. So the first thing to point out is that we don't have a lot of aspects today, and so for all of the 12 signs, I think that we might find that Mars opposition Pluto is quite overwhelming. I mean, I know the Mars opposition Pluto isn't exact until I think it's Friday, but still I think all of the signs are going to feel it. So that's a main thing to consider. But on the plus side, it's a waxing moon. Moon is in Aquarius. It's getting bigger. So I mean, I think that's a good thing. Anyway, let's look at the 12 signs. Aries, you are feeling perhaps a little more relaxed. I think that you feel that you have made your point, and you're perhaps more sort of comfortable that you have done what you need to do. And now that the moon is in Aquarius, you may on one hand feel that you can afford to perhaps socialize. I mean, socialization was something that you'd normally expect to happen, with all the New Year's Eve celebrations, but I think that it was perhaps a little bit delayed, and now you are in the mood to be with people, and that's where you'd like to be. And with the moon in Aquarius, you're probably feeling quite idealistic and also curious, and so your attempt will be to just let things happen and be relaxed and just hope that that feeling is kind of reciprocated. Yet we do have an opposition between the moon and Mars, and of course Mars is your ruler, and with that moon-Mars opposition, I think it does have to be handled, and I think there is some danger that despite your best efforts to keep things cool and calm, there are a few disruptions and maybe disagreements, and that might be caused by questions about what should be done. I mean, you have things that you really would like to do, and they're important to you. I mean, you are trying to be sociable as well, but I suppose if you're too sociable, you might find that your fundamental freedom of action and scope for, doing what is important to you just could be disrupted. So I think you have to be a little bit careful, therefore, in terms of who you meet, who you hang out with, who you spend your time with, because it might not be as free-flowing as you would like it to be. And so the question is, how do you deal with disagreements? And I suppose it might be best if everyone just goes their different way up after a certain point. And also, you have to not necessarily take things at face value. So if you take things at face value, if you just go somewhere, you look at things as they are and you reach conclusions, you're not really interacting. And I think there is scope for interaction, because today, Aries, you are, in your own way, quite optimistic. I mean, it is the new year and you feel that there are new possibilities, and you're quite prepared to talk about these new possibilities and to tell people why you feel optimistic. And I think that people will listen to you. And so if anyone is really stuck for whatever reason, you can perhaps say something to cheer them up. You'll know what to say. So don't take things at face value, and don't even take people's moods at face value. Some people find it difficult not to advertise their moods. They're just, I suppose, wearing a heart on their sleeves. But you can interact with this, and you can perhaps change someone's mood. And it's just a question of being positive and thinking about, what really is possible. But we cannot take away from the fact that Mars is getting really close to an opposition of Pluto, and Mars is your ruler. And at the same time, the moon is picking up on this opposition. And so, in the end, with this Mars opposition Pluto, it has to be you who is in control. If you're not in control and you want to be in control, in spite of your best efforts to be relaxed, you want to be relaxed. In spite of those best efforts, it just may not work out. So don't restrict yourself. Don't don't make a big sacrifice. You might think, oh, you're going to follow the crowd because it's easiest. You're going to do what other people say. You don't entirely agree with them, but let's just make everyone happy. It's not going to work. And so perhaps if you want a relaxing day, it's perhaps important to be assertive, right from the beginning. Taurus, there is a conjunction between Moon and Pluto today, and this conjunction between the Moon and Pluto is to an extent going to focus on what you want. And there do seem to be things that you do want, and you're quite insistent about it, and you do feel that it's important. And that's good. But if there's something you want, you need to make sure that you're clear about it. Because if you don't tell people what you want, then, how are they going to know? And they might do things that you don't want. So do be very clear about that, and don't ignore your ambitions. I think you do have ambitions. Ambitions are developing. I mean, you've already got Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto is developing in Aquarius. Pluto went into Aquarius in November, but it's now making its presence felt through that conjunction between the Moon and Pluto. And so if you become obsessed with something over the course of the day, don't be surprised. It might be an obsession with something you feel that really should be happening, and you really want to get on with it. And the Moon is not just conjunct Pluto, it is opposition Mars. And that might be about the things that might get in your way. Things could get in your way with Moon opposition Mars. And if things get in your way, you might not take kindly to it. And in that light, I suppose we have to think about your family and what's going on in terms of family relations. And I suppose it's a time of the year when family can be important. But with Mars opposition Pluto and Moon opposition Mars, things related to your family may not always work to plan, and you might be perhaps irritated by certain members of your family. Maybe they want things and you want things and you want different things, and that could represent the seeds of some kind of a disagreement. And so I suppose that Moon Pluto conjunction, does need to be respected. Ask yourself what you want. Ask yourself what is really important to you. And I suppose I have to say that you need to make sure that you get it. And at the same time, perhaps make a special effort to consider why you want what you want. I mean, if you become obsessed with something, ask yourself whether it's reasonable. Or perhaps you're picking up on something just strange. It might be something in the universe, something the universe is pushing out. It's kind of difficult to immediately handle. Now, let me explain why I'm saying that. Because if you look at the chart, you see that Venus is your ruler, is actually on the Neptune-Pluto midpoint. Now that might sound a little bit obscure, but it is a conjunction, Venus on a Neptune-Pluto midpoint. And so Neptune-Pluto as a pair represents something that's really out there, these two very distant planets. Pluto, the planet of transformation, Neptune, the planet of wanting to kind of dissolve into something. And so you're feeling something else. And this sense of the cosmic may be having an impact on your ambitions and the way you feel, and it may not be anything that you can particularly describe. And so perhaps some of your ambitions, particularly the loftier ambitions, perhaps the ambitions of a sort of a spiritual cosmic nature, maybe in the first instance need to be kept to yourself, and you need to kind of work out how these rather far-fetched ambitions might be having an impact on your more down-to-earth, day-to-day ambitions. I mean, I think you're touching something very important, something very cosmic, but it may not easily translate into the material world. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, Moon is opposition Mars, and Mars is opposition Pluto. So close relationships probably need to be handled with a certain amount of respect, because Mars opposition Pluto may represent someone who really wants to get their way and is not prepared to budge. So who is that person? Does that describe someone who is important to you, someone you know well, maybe you spend all your time with? But don't assume that people are going to want to just automatically do things your way. Some people are going to maybe very stubborn, maybe annoyingly stubborn, and so it might be a situation where agreement is actually very difficult to find, though I suppose you can perhaps make some effort to try to understand why someone is stubborn, why someone is holding onto their ground so tightly, and because it may be something that you just have to accept and respect. Gemini, we have the Moon in Aquarius, Moon conjunct Pluto in Aquarius. And I suppose, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the Moon won't go into Aquarius until pretty late in the day, but it gets there in the end. And so with this Moon-Pluto conjunction in Aquarius, you may be thinking perhaps beyond your immediate environment. Your thinking may be about what is possible in the future, or perhaps what is going on the other side of the world, and you're certainly interested. And with the Moon-Pluto conjunction, you perhaps have a chance to consider some of your fundamental beliefs. How real are your beliefs? And I know that there are certain things you might be holding on to very tightly with that Moon conjunct Pluto. You feel that you feel that you've made up your mind about something and you are not going to budge. But do consider the facts. The facts are changing, and it may be that you get new information, and this information perhaps tells you that you might have got something wrong. So, Gemini, don't hold on to your beliefs too tightly. And I suppose in a way I'm talking to myself here. I'm actually quite opinionated. I've got my sun in Gemini, and maybe it's because I've got my Taurus rising, but I am quite opinionated, and some Geminis are, but every Gemini has the capacity for change. I mean, it is a two-bodied sign, and so perhaps with the Moon-Pluto conjunction, you might decide that in the end that you haven't got everything right. Now, also, I suppose Moon in Aquarius, Moon conjunct Pluto, it does have a certain connection with travel, and I don't know if you've got any travel plans, but travel plans might be of concern to you, or you might decide you want to visit somewhere. You're thinking about it. You're thinking about what you need to do to give yourself new experiences and new knowledge. And I suppose with the Moon-Pluto conjunction, you might just realize that there is somewhere you want to visit, and then you have to ask, how would you visit it? What's the best way of visiting it? How do you do it in a way that is eco? As you know, if you've been watching these videos for long enough, I'm not a great fan of long distance travel. I'm not really a fan of travel in general. I think there is an argument that travel narrows the mind. Or at least a little travel narrows the mind. I think the trouble with travel is that sometimes you go somewhere with preconceptions about this. It might be a culture that's very different from your own, and you go there and you just see enough of it to just confirm your own prejudices. I mean, okay, if you spend a long, long time somewhere, that might be different. But travel in itself is not mind-expanding. I'm completely unconvinced about that. But anyway, with this Moon-Pluto conjunction, you may feel that you need to go somewhere. And you have to ask whether or not that is an appropriate thing to do. And I mean, I suppose it's also connected with the fact that it is January the 1st. And so with January the 1st, people think about their New Year resolutions, what they want to do in the year ahead, and also, I suppose, what they believe. And that goes back to that Moon-Pluto conjunction. Just don't underestimate the possibility of changing your mind. I should also point out, though, Mars opposition Pluto. Mars opposition Pluto may represent some kind of argument or disagreement that has a factual basis. The kind of facts that really could be checked if anyone could be bothered. So if you find yourself having an argument about something factual, consider the possibility that it's a waste of time, but really nothing justifies that argument, really, if it can just be checked out. I mean, if the information is available, why argue about, I don't know, what is the capital city of Chad? I mean, when you can look it up. And in general, Gemini, there is a sense of idealism creeping in. A feeling that you want to devote yourself to some cause. It might be a political cause, it might just be something spiritual or something religious. And I think you have a belief, Gemini, that things could be better, that things can be better. And yeah, it is quite idealistic. And the question is, what do you have to do to make things better? And I suppose that's the key question, isn't it? And you can't have a closed mind about that. You have to experiment, perhaps, and be hopeful, because I think that some of your ideas can bear fruit, provided you do some early pruning. Early pruning, yes, early pruning. I mean, some of your ideas are not realistic. They've gone too far, but you do that pruning, and you have a more realistic belief system, and I think that realistic belief system can be the foundation of sort of real optimism over the course of 2025. Cancer, the moon is changing sign, moving from Capricorn into Aquarius, and so with the moon changing sign, there may be a certain change of emphasis. I think that with the moon moving through Capricorn, there was a sense in which you had to consider other people's needs and other people's idiosyncrasies, and you didn't feel that you could be entirely independent. And with the moon moving into Aquarius, you're starting to feel that you really do have to look after yourself, and that you have a particular way of doing things which maybe can't be shared. And I suppose that is intensified by the fact that the moon is making a conjunction to Mars, and the moon is making a conjunction to Pluto, and it is making an opposition to Mars. So with moon conjunct Pluto, moon opposition Mars, that might actually make you pretty intense, very focused on certain things, and so focused that you don't really want to engage too much with other people. Other people might spoil that focus. So moon conjunct Pluto, I think, gives you a certain gravitas and an intensity which maybe not everyone can deal with. And then you throw in Moon opposition Mars, and that gives us the idea of someone who may be somewhat defensive. Certainly if anyone takes liberties, you're not going to take kindly to that, and you'll know how to defend your ground. Now, this Moon conjunct Pluto, Moon opposition Mars, does fall across the finance axis of your chart, particularly Moon opposition Mars. I mean, Mars is in Leo, Moon is in Aquarius, and so money may be an area where you are particularly defensive, where you really want to stand your ground, and things may occur to you, and you may look at your attitude to money, how you've been spending money, how you've been responding to outside financial demands, whether from people, organizations, institutions, charities, whatever, and how you've been responding to this. And perhaps you feel now, when you look back at it, maybe you feel that certain people, certain organizations have perhaps been taking liberties, and you've been spending more money than you should have been in the past, and people have been financially taking you for granted. So that might be one way of looking at it. And this Moon-Pluto conjunction opposition Mars, I mean, it does affect the sort of the eighth house from Cancer. Of course, that's Aquarius. And this house is often connected with agreements and legacies and wills. And so as you look at 2025, perhaps you should look at and consider any agreements that you might have committed yourself to, or if there are sort of documents like wills, legacies, they have an impact, and you should consider them. Maybe look at the small print, and look at the small print in a fairly aggressive way. You're looking out for things which maybe people have deliberately put in to obscure matters. So, I mean, I know it's January the 1st, 2025 has just started, but there is a sense that something needs to be sorted out that requires a lot of attention, and it's not a time necessarily for trusting people. I think that's definitely true, actually. Moon conjunct Pluto, Moon opposition Mars, and that's especially the case when it comes to agreements and anything written down in a sort of a formal, legalistic way. There is scope for distrust, and I suppose that's why people often put things down in writing in a legalistic way, because they don't want to create any ambiguity, but there still could be ambiguity. So do pay attention to the small print, and if there's something you've been meaning to read of a legal nature, or meaning to familiarize yourself with, then now might be the opportunity to do it. I mean, I know that's perhaps not what you want to hear on New Year's Day, but I think that might be where your priorities lie. But overall, Cancer, I think you're a serious person. You're taking your priorities seriously, and you don't really want anyone to mess with you. And I certainly think that you're going to be able to look after yourself. Leo, we have a opposition between Mars and Pluto coming up. Now, this Mars-Pluto opposition is going to be exact in a couple of days' time, but I think that you are now really starting to feel it. And the reason you're starting to feel it is because of the Moon, because we've got the Moon moving into Aquarius. Moon moves into Aquarius, it makes a conjunction with Pluto, and it makes an opposition to Mars. So this movement of Moon in Aquarius, your opposite sign, does to an extent put the focus on other people and what other people are doing, the kind of control other people have, and the influence they have. And so that's something that you're perhaps obsessing about a bit. and the moon also triggers this Mars opposition Pluto. So I think, Leo, you may be very concerned by the power equation. There's always a power equation, isn't there? Who's got the power, who hasn't got the power, who's following who. These matters are of interest to you. And with Mars in Leo, still in Leo, I mean, Mars retrograde is going to retrograde out of Leo very soon and move into Cancer. But it's still in Leo today. And so that Mars in Leo suggests that you really want to protect yourself, look after your own interests, and, hold firm. Yet, the moon is opposition Mars. Pluto is opposition Mars. So it may occur to you that other people can be quite manipulative. They can, do their best to get you to do things their way. At least that's how it feels. Of course, it's important that you don't exaggerate, that you don't create something out of nothing. I mean, it's easy to project. It's easy to assume, because you see everything in terms of power and who's in control, that other people are behaving in the same way. So, give other people a chance. Don't necessarily assume that in some way they're trying to weaken you. And I suppose, if possible, you should make things very clear as early as possible. You don't want to get involved in an overt power struggle where it seems to be you against another person, and that wouldn't be healthy. And I think that with the moon in Aquarius, give yourself the time to understand what people want. And if you understand their motives, it's going to make it easier for you to make the right decisions, and you're not going to sort of have an exaggerated reaction, assuming that everyone's trying to get you down, everyone's trying to reduce your power. I don't think that is necessarily the case. And it is the case, though, that if you feel that you need to assert yourself, you definitely can. I mean, today I think you will have a way of words. You will have a way with words, and you will be able to, I think, express yourself extremely well, and you'll be able to express yourself with power and conviction. And once people realize how serious you are, that certain things really matter to you, they're likely to, in the end, do things your way. I mean, after all, everyone wants a quiet life, don't they? And so Leo, be aware of the issues of power, but don't take these issues of power necessarily too seriously. You mustn't assume that everyone is trying to get control over you. That is not the case. And what you can do is you can perhaps use that Moon Pluto conjunction in Aquarius to really get to the bottom of things. I mean, Pluto likes to explore in a quite serious way. It likes to delve under the surface, and that's certainly something you can do. And if you delve under the surface long enough, I think you'll have actually a quite good insight into what makes other people tick, and I think that you'll have a better understanding and appreciation of their underlying motives. Virgo, with the moon conjunct Pluto today, there may be certain things that are really very important to you. You might feel that they're actually overwhelmingly important, so important that you want to put all your energy into sorting it out. And it might actually be that kind of day. first day of 2025, time's flying. Soon it will be normal. That's perhaps what one's afraid of, isn't it? When things get normal. The Christmas break is over. The Christmas New Year break is finished, and you perhaps feel you want to hit the ground running, but you just don't feel ready to hit the ground running. And so with this Moon-Pluto conjunction, it might be a time where you just feel that you have to be properly prepared, and you don't feel sufficiently prepared right now. And so that may actually be where your energies are. And the Moon is not just conjunct Pluto. The Moon is opposition Mars. Now that Moon opposition Mars conjunct Pluto does indicate that there may be a possibility that you overdo things. You just take things too far. And if you take things too far, you could do yourself an injury. I mean, not necessarily as in broken leg or anything like that, but you could, at the very least, sort of exhaust yourself. And, everyone has got just a finite amount of energy, you included. And so with Moon conjunct Pluto, Moon opposition Mars, just pushing yourself too far is not necessarily a good idea. So perhaps, Virgo, you need to restrict what's on your list. Do you need to have a list of everything that needs to be done today? Some of the things you want to do today don't need to be done, I don't think. And so perhaps, Virgo, you should make an effort to keep things simple and be satisfied with small gains, and don't get too concerned about detail. Now that can happen with Moon conjunct Pluto in Aquarius. It's just focusing too much energy on one thing and feeling it has to be absolutely right. And of course, in this situation, it's possible that perfection is just an impossible ideal. But, talking about ideals, Virgo, I think at the moment you are actually quite idealistic. You really do think that things could be better, and you're not satisfied with the way things are on the surface. You kind of imagine how things should be and how you'd like things to be, and that's nice, provided that you don't get caught up in another person's promises or other people's promises. People are promising a lot, but what matters is you and how you create your own promise. So don't feel that you have to focus on other people's promises. Make promises to yourself based on what you know about yourself. I mean, you know your own limitations, you know your own weaknesses, and I think you know what is possible. And so when you look at what is possible, Virgo, try to imagine the very best, and be realistic at the same time. But if you imagine the very best, and perhaps ask yourself, how would you like things to be, say, in 6 months' time, July the 1st? What would you like to change? And it's okay to be slightly overambitious in terms of your goals. You want to push yourself, but you don't want to be crazily overambitious, because if you're trying to do something that has actually no chance of success, well, in the end, you're setting yourself up for failure. So maybe, Virgo, it's a time, as it is New Year's Day, New Year's resolutions and all this kind of thing, be optimistic, but you don't be too optimistic, and try to ask yourself, what can be done by July the 1st. And I think if you take that kind of approach, in the end, I don't think you'll be disappointed. And of course, right now, I think you have the motivation to make things happen, and also to sort of make the necessary preparations. Libra, we have the Moon moving out of Capricorn into Aquarius. And I think that this sign change is pretty good. And I mean, the moon in Capricorn, from a Libra perspective, can be a little bit overwhelming. It just may be too focused on one thing, and maybe even a little bit claustrophobic. I don't know whether you felt at all claustrophobic over the new year, but the moon is moving out of Capricorn, and it's moving into Aquarius. And so, Aquarius is very much a Libra-friendly sign, it being an air sign. And I think that with the moon in Aquarius, you perhaps get a greater sense of what is possible. And I think you're going to be just a little bit more adventurous as well. You're going to perhaps want to venture out, perhaps try things out, perhaps try out skills and abilities that you haven't tried out before. Perhaps you haven't tried them out for a long time. Just see what happens. And I think that you might be favourably surprised. And also the moon is making a conjunction to Pluto. And so in terms of this conjunction between the moon and Pluto in Aquarius, it perhaps should be about a real focus on you and what makes you so creative, and what makes you an individual, and give it everything you've got and don't necessarily be distracted. So the moon, when it moves into Aquarius, it doesn't just make a conjunction to Pluto, it does make an opposition to Mars. And that opposition to Mars may indicate that certain people don't necessarily have full respect for what you're trying to achieve. Mars retrograde in Leo might represent someone who really wants attention, who stubbornly wants attention, and they won't go away. And this person could be quite disruptive in terms of, you doing what is important to you. If you want to do something that's really important to you, you don't want to be disturbed. Okay, you can be disturbed, but only by people who are prepared to give you full cooperation. But it just may be that there is a mismatch between your priorities and the priorities of other people. And as a Libra, your first inclination is often to compromise, but I really don't think this is a good thing to do. Not right now. I think there are things you need to do which are important to you. You don't want to wait, and if other people don't like it, then I don't think you should necessarily listen to them. You should just explain to them that there are things you want to do, and that's the way it is. Or better still, you don't explain anything. You don't advertise what you're doing. You don't give people an opportunity to try to stop you. So do what matters, and in the process, do try to enjoy yourself. Because I think with that moon conjunct Pluto, and I suppose that moon opposition Mars, I mean, that's a bit tense, that moon opposition Mars. It might be someone trying to spoil the party, but it could just be energizing, that moon opposition Mars. But I mean, I think you can enjoy yourself, and enjoy yourself in a really quite serious way, something that is important to you. And if you're doing something that's important to you, then how can you not enjoy yourself? Because you're going to feel a great sense of meaning and satisfaction. Scorpio, we have the moon moving into Aquarius. So moon moving into Aquarius in itself is not a particularly big deal. I mean, the moon moves into Aquarius every month. But it's what the moon does when it moves into Aquarius. And what the moon does is it makes a conjunction to Pluto, and it makes an opposition to Mars. And so what the moon is doing is is triggering the Mars-Pluto opposition, which I have been talking about over the last few days. It's like a trigger, and so this Mars-Pluto opposition was getting stronger and stronger. And remember, Mars is in Leo, and high-profile sign in your chart. So Mars in Leo is about you wanting to assert yourself, wanting perhaps to get noticed, and wanting to make an impact, and it may be quite important to you. Then Mars opposition Pluto, that Pluto is all the things that might be holding you back potentially, particularly relating to home and family and other obligations, and the fact that I suppose it's January the 1st and it's a holiday, and so people aren't supposed to be doing anything on January the 1st. But there are things you want to do today. You're not too bothered by the fact that it's a holiday. But still, it's an irritation. And you do have to take into account what people want. And then the moon makes a conjunction to Pluto, and it makes an opposition to Mars. So that might pile on the pressure. And you might just feel that if you do what you want, other people might be upset, or they might try to tell you that you should be doing something else. And so it's a question of how do you navigate that situation. And I suppose you have to be tough, but you don't want to be too tough, because if you're too tough, you're going to sort of alienate people. Moon opposition Mars is anger, can be anger, and it could be your anger. It could also be other people's anger. But I think that you are going to get really irritated if anyone tries to restrict your freedom of action, and I think that you don't want anger to sort of labour under the surface and fester away. You don't want that to happen. And instead, perhaps you have to be just open and honest right to begin with about what you want and what you don't want. And that just might be the best way of handling things. Yet, Scorpio, you can actually be quite persuasive. And if you do get resistance, or if people are trying to persuade you to do something, perhaps they're trying to persuade you to not do what you want to do, you do have a certain gift with words at the moment. And I think that you're quite good at presenting things in the best possible light. So if anyone is uncertain about something, you may be, the right person to explain everything. Explain that everything is going to be fine, and you can actually, in general, create an atmosphere of optimism. So perhaps that's your task. It is a day where I think things are quite intense, and you are quite intense, and perhaps other people are as well. But you can reduce the pressure through the right choice of words by explaining things in a way that is enthusiastic, and maybe in the end people will actually listen to you and realize that you're right, that your approach is the way forward. Sagittarius, the moon is moving into Aquarius, and so with the moon moving into Aquarius, I think that's something that you appreciate, because the moon has been in Capricorn, and I don't think you're entirely comfortable with the moon in Capricorn. The moon in Capricorn perhaps raised issues that you didn't necessarily want to deal with, perhaps issues of a financial nature, or perhaps there was just in general a concern about money. Even if money wasn't a real problem, you just felt that money needed your attention. Maybe not just money, but material things in general. But anyway, the moon is moving out of Capricorn into Aquarius, and when the moon moves into Aquarius, it makes a conjunction to Pluto, and it makes an opposition to Mars. Now, that Moon-Pluto conjunction, I think, can make you very convincing. The things you say will make a lot of sense, and you'll be able to demonstrate power and conviction. And so now might be a good time to explain things and explain how you want things to be. And I think in many cases people will listen. But the Moon, although it makes a conjunction to Pluto, that seems very self-contained. It also makes an opposition to Mars. And so that Moon opposition Mars, it could be exciting. It might give you the motivation to explore, to try out new things, and not to be satisfied with what is right in front of you. Just thinking that there could be more. There could be other centres of action which you need to discover. But the Moon opposition Mars can be quite an angry aspect, and it can be about angry communications, or it's possible that you just say something without thinking all of it through. You've got the broad brush strokes, you understand that, but there are just certain details that you haven't fully got to grips with, and so you perhaps need to work that through. And when you're talking to people about controversial issues, don't naturally assume that it's all going to run smoothly, because if you have strong feelings about something, then it's very likely that someone else has got strong feelings about it as well, and it's quite possible that your strong feelings and someone else's strong feelings are poles apart. And so at the very least, you shouldn't discuss things if you aren't very sure of your ground. Now, that can be the problem. It may be a situation here, Sagittarius, where it's like one of those math problems, isn't it? Where you're supposed to show your workings, and the answer is correct. You've got the answer correct, but the workings are all over the place. The workings don't make any sense. And so there is some danger that you might be in the right, but actually when you try to explain yourself, it doesn't come out very well. You give the impression of not necessarily knowing what you're talking about, although you know absolutely for certain you're in the right. And so be very careful about wheeling out your ideas. Even if you feel you've got everything covered, it's just that another person might be attacking, and they might also undermine your confidence. And so perhaps what that means is, yes, you're in the right, but perhaps you need to do some more work on your calculations. Perhaps the factual basis isn't fully sorted out, and that is something you have to deal with. So acquiring a few facts about points of interest and points of concern today might be a very good thing to do. Capricorn, the moon is leaving your sign, moving into Aquarius, and Aquarius in the Capricorn chart can be about money, and so it's possible with the moon moving into Aquarius, not just moving into Aquarius, but making a conjunction to Pluto, that financial issues rear their head, and you may feel that money requires a lot of attention, and perhaps even that money needs to be defended. Because Moon conjunct Pluto in Aquarius, Moon is not just conjunct Pluto, it's also opposition Mars. And so I think, Capricorn, you may be quite sort of jealous of your own financial resources, and you want to hold on to them, and you certainly want to be in control. And I think that's okay, but you have to ask yourself, do you want to engage in any kind of battle about it? Because the Moon is opposition Mars. So, Moon opposition Mars across the finance axis of your chart might well indicate a struggle with money. And it may feel that it's a somewhat zero-sum situation. If you make money, someone else loses money, and vice versa. Your loss could be someone else's gain. I don't know whether that is a true picture, but it might be how it feels. And after all, you are an earth sign, and the financial dimension can be important, and you're just very aware at the moment of how motivated other people are by money. And it's not just people like people you meet in your everyday life on an individual basis. It's like organizations, governments, city bureaucracies, whatever. It is the bottom line, and I think it can actually be quite frightening, quite overwhelming to really understand and come to a conclusion that money is the bottom line. And I suppose, there are all these cliches about people worshipping money and money being the root of all evil, but there is an element of truth there. And money can become some people's god. It shouldn't, of course, be your god, because you know that there are more important things out there if you're honest with yourself. But perhaps you'll start to realize, in terms of listening to people, listening to organizations, governments, cities, just knowing how important money is to them, and that other concerns, the really important concerns which go beyond money, it doesn't seem to be an issue, and that can be a little bit disturbing for you. So, I'm afraid that Moon opposition Mars, Moon conjunct Pluto, Moon opposition Mars does kind of dominate the day, and I think that there is something about you that is quite intense, and it may also be about other people. The Moon rules Cancer, your opposite sign, and so the Moon is making a conjunction to Pluto, and so that might mean intense people who really want to look after their own interests. And you may perhaps be somewhat troubled by that, because you can see people's motivations, and when you look at people's motivations, when you understand people's motivations, the experience can be somewhat overwhelming, maybe even a little bit upsetting. And again, it goes back to realizing that money for so many people is just the prime motivator. It shouldn't be that way, but unfortunately it very often is. And that's the main thing for today. It's a quite intense day, I think, for Capricorns. I think that you are able, like yesterday, you are able to get on with people, just provided things don't come to a point. Provided things just don't get too intense. If you're with people, ideally things should be on a fairly light level, and complicated subjects should not be discussed. Try to keep things simple, and then I think that you can actually have quite a good time with other people. Just don't let things get too deep. Aquarius, New Year's Day, new beginning, and it's kind of nice that on the first day of the year, the Moon is moving into your sign, and where it makes a conjunction to Pluto. So I'm thinking and hoping that as you hit the new year, you're feeling a great sense of your own power and an ability that you can really do things, that you can make things happen. It might not perhaps have felt like that right at the beginning of the day. If you were, I don't know if you were celebrating the new year, but it might have felt that you weren't really in the mood for celebration. But as the day progresses, things are changing. The moon has moved into late Capricorn. Now it's certainly noon New York time. It's very much in Aquarius, and if you're in Australia or New Zealand, yes, the moon won't move into Aquarius until the end of the day, but still, it is an Aquarius day in the end. And so, Aquarius, I think that you should be feeling a sense of purpose, a sense that you're in the right place, maybe a sense that you're even in the right year, 2025, especially as the moon is not just moving into Aquarius, but it's making a conjunction to Pluto. And again, Pluto is in your sign, and so you understand the kind of transformation that Pluto represents. I mean, you understand it perhaps at an unconscious level, but I think you do get it. And so with the moon conjunct Pluto, you may just get a feeling that you know what's happening, and you're fully able to make an impact. And if the world isn't to your liking, then perhaps at some level you can change the world, or at least change your small part of the world. So I'm hoping that you will start the year on a fairly optimistic note. Now, the moon, when it moves into Aquarius, does make an opposition aspect to Mars, and this is a reminder that there is this Mars-Pluto opposition forming, and I think it's exact on Friday. But this moon opposition, Mars opposition Pluto aspect forming, which is exact on Friday. And yeah, you're starting to feel it, and you're aware of your environment, and you're aware of how your environment has the potential to constrain you, but you also know that in the end, whatever the constraints, you're able to overthrow them, and you're able to do what's important to you. And so what do you want to dedicate yourself to? In fact, that might be a good thing to do with moon conjunct Pluto in Aquarius. Dedicate yourself to something. Tell yourself that you really want to achieve it by a particular date. And so, with this seriousness, you have to ask, how are you occurring to other people? I think you might come across as being a fairly powerful person. I mean, I think that's perhaps how you regard it. And you seem to be self-contained and, I think, reasonably confident. But the moon is making an opposition to Mars. Mars is in Leo. Mars is in your opposite sign. And so with that Mars in Leo might represent some kind of clash. There are things you want to create, and there are changes that are very important to you. But perhaps other people don't have the same opinion. They perhaps want things to stay the same. Mars is in Leo, it's in your opposite sign, and it's going retrograde. So that might represent someone, or perhaps a group of people, who are almost going backwards. They want to dwell in the past, whereas you want to move forward to the future. So there could be a mismatch in terms of you and certain people around you, just going in different directions. And the question is, what do you do about it? I think that, it just depends how much power you have and how much control you have. It may be that you can try to change people's minds. I think that that's something you can do. I think that at the moment your social skills are quite good. You're able to come down to other people's level, explain things simply, and in many cases get them to sort of follow your lead. But there are limits to how effective you are socially, and just some people just are really, really adamant that their way is the right way, and in that case, I don't think you're going to be able to carry them with you, and you just have to let them get on with it or not get on with it, because you definitely have your own priorities, and I think you have a chance to really push things through. So focus on that Moon-Pluto conjunction in Aquarius, and tell yourself that you can you can create change, and if you don't like things, you don't have to put up with it. Pisces, we have sort of planets, or at least the moon, moving out of Capricorn. We've got the sun in Capricorn, but now the moon is going into Aquarius. You've already got Pluto in Aquarius. You've already got Venus in Aquarius. Venus doesn't move out of Pisces yet. Sorry, Venus doesn't move out of Aquarius yet. I think it's on Friday that Venus moves into Pisces, that Venus moves into your sign. So at the moment, there is a certain Aquarius emphasis, and that Aquarius emphasis will get stronger over the course of a day as the moon moves out of Capricorn into Aquarius. And so this emphasis means that maybe there are things you don't necessarily have to do. You shouldn't allow yourself to be sort of overwhelmed by outside pressure, and I don't think that you need to be particularly sociable. I don't think you're going to want to be particularly sociable. I think that you'll prefer your own company, and there may be things you want to work out on your own. This moon Pluto conjunction that we have today is maybe it's quite a private thing, and it's about change happening at an almost unconscious level, almost unconscious. I think you can just work out how that change is unfolding, and that Moon Pluto conjunction, I think in many cases it needs to be worked out on your own, and I don't think anyone can really help you with it. And give yourself the time to just settle into the new year, and also just settle into these realizations you are having, and don't feel just because you know that something is changing. Don't feel that you have to act immediately. I mean, there may be some temptation to always act on your feelings, to have a feeling and then to think that you've got to respond. You've got to change things around to accommodate one feeling after another, because the problem is that you could end up being in a constant state of change, feeling things always have to move. Things are not good enough, that if you have this impulse to change, then that needs to be reflected on your outside environment. But the trouble is with that, you wouldn't always be changing, and you'd never get anything done. So it might be a good idea, Pisces, if you just relax, let your ideas develop, particularly your ideas about change, and also try to observe the world as it unfolds. And then, in a couple of days' time, I think you'll be in a better position to to actually do things, to actually act on this feeling of transformation, and perhaps you'll understand precisely what kind of transformations you want, and not just transform things for the sake of it. So Pisces, don't be overwhelmed by it all, and don't feel that there is a desperate hurry to make things happen, because there isn't a hurry. It's only January the 1st. The year has just started, and this today, January the 1st, I don't think there's much you have to do, and perhaps the less you're seen, the less you're heard, the better for you, and perhaps also maybe the better for everyone else, because you have to ask, what have you got to contribute right now? I think you might have things to contribute, say, in a few days' time, but right now, I don't think you've got anything to say or much to say that people are really going to understand and appreciate. And so your first task is perhaps to work on yourself. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at things from a perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is New Year's Day 2025 going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was, now before I tell you what this hexagram is, don't panic, it's not what it seems. So anyway, the first hexagram I got was hexagram 18, which is illness. Greg Winkup describes it as illness. The Wilhelm translation calls it work on what has been spoiled. So illness does not necessarily mean a literal illness, and it's illness in the sense of something is wrong, but it's also something that can be fixed. So illness does imply healing in this sense, and you can just see it as work on what has been spoiled. I mean, one reason I've given it Winkup's translation rather than the Wilhelm translation is because illness is a nice one word, 7 letters. Work on what has been spoilt is somewhat perhaps long, maybe even long-winded, but so you get that impression that something isn't right, and you need to work on it. So don't be satisfied with the way things are. And as you hit the new year, as you look at what's going on around you, it's obvious, I think, that something hasn't been done right in the past, and it now needs to be fixed. And so that is your task. And we do have 2 moving lines here. The 5th line moves and the 6th line moves. And with the 5th line moving, it's talking about a problem that is not necessarily our fault. In fact, the I Ching talks about putting right the faults of one's father. So it might be something generational, something has been done wrong in the past. I mean, not necessarily literally by one's father, but one just gets the idea that over the course of in the past, things have not been done properly, things have been neglected, things have been allowed to go to seed, and now you're in a position where you actually have to do something about it, or at least you should do something about it. And so if you do something about it, the illness can be healed. And then the top line moves, and the top line is about withdrawal. It's about withdrawing from the world and all its problems and all its sickness and everything that's wrong with the world, and looking after oneself. And I think that's perhaps quite important. It's a reminder that we cannot change the world. And I think today, with that moon conjunct Pluto, many of us are perhaps hypersensitive to what is wrong with the world, and we might feel that we can put everything to right, and of course we can't put everything to right, and we withdraw not because we're not bothered, not because we're being lazy or we're abandoning our responsibilities. It's not about that. It's about putting things right within ourselves, and that's the first thing we have to do. And if we put things right in ourselves, then we're going to be able to deal with other things. But that should be our first priority. And these two lines, the fifth line and the sixth line, are actually not too bad. And they're not portending any kind of disaster or anything like that. And so, with this word illness, I'm not saying you're going to be ill today. I'm just saying that you're going to be aware that something is not right. Now, because we have two lines moving, we shift to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we shift to is hexagram 48, which is the well. And so the well is something we all need. I mean, we can't function without water. And if you look at the well in terms of a previous hexagram, which is working on what has been spoilt or perhaps illness, the well is essential to a community. It's essential to ourselves because we need water. And it's possible that wells can fall into disrepair. Wells need to be maintained. They can fill with mud, garbage can fall into the well, they can get blocked, and they can no longer provide the refreshment and sustenance that they need to provide. And so perhaps this is a reminder that we have to ask ourselves, what is the basis of our life and our happiness, and not just our life and our happiness, but the happiness and life of our community? What is the basis of it, and is it in good order? And I suspect the well is actually not in good order. I think it needs to be cleaned out. It needs to be cleared so that it can actually provide real sustenance, that it can provide not just sustenance, but its life-giving force, because without the well, there's no water and everything dies. So that's something that we perhaps should be focusing on. So, the general thing with this I Ching is, as you hit the new year, it's clear that things are not right. They're not disastrously wrong, but they need to be fixed. Now, it may be that before we can fix everything, we need to fix ourselves. We need to withdraw a bit and make sure that we are all in good order. And it's also not about blame. I think if there is a problem, it's not our fault. It's someone else's fault. And hence this idea of putting right the mistakes of the father. And it's not necessarily literally the father, but what has been neglected in previous times, we now need to really focus on it. And if we can do it, then we can make sure that the well is in good order and everything is flowing. And that's it. That's the I Ching. And now I want to very quickly look at some of the themes of 2025, and how do you encapsulate 2025? I had this theory, but I don't know whether it's correct or not, that if you want to create a chart for a year, the year ahead, you could literally take the moment of the new year. You set a chart for the new year, the moment the new year happens, and you just read it like that. I mean, that seems incredibly crude. And so, let me just show you what I mean. So, if we look at what's happening here, here's a chart for 2025. I've set it for Washington DC. This is the moment 2025 starts in Washington DC. So I haven't gone for something astronomical like Aries ingress or sort of a Capricorn ingress or a new moon or a full moon. It's it's the political start of a year using using, in this case, America, its time zone. And there are certainly a few problems with this approach, because if you take a midnight chart for the new year, you're always going to get certain things. You're always going to get the Sun in Capricorn. You're always going to get Sun on the IC. You're always going to get Libra rising, regardless. So, if you set this chart, I mean, because this is a chart for Washington DC, and so you can see there's 719 Libra rising, and you can see that you've got at that precise moment you've got South Node quite close to the ascendant. You've got Black Moon Lilith pretty much on the ascendant. You've got Sun conjunct the IC, and so if you were to say do the same thing, but say for somewhere else, let's say I don't know, Kiev, for example, in Ukraine, it's going to be a similar chart. Libra rising, Black Moon Lilith on the ascendant, and the Sun on the IC. So it seems to be, at least in the first instance, to be a rather absurd way of trying to evaluate a new year. But maybe not. Maybe we can get some broad ideas about this chart. And again, it doesn't necessarily matter too much where we set the chart for. It's about the world at large. So it's a very, very general chart. And so whether it's Kiev or Washington, or I suppose we can set this for London. Let's set this, I don't know if we set this for Westminster. It's the same kind of chart, always with Libra rising and Sun on the IC. But we do know that the moon is waxing, that it is, and it happens, that the year starts on a new moon, very close to a new moon. And so, the moon, the Sun is at 10 Capricorn, moon is at 23 Capricorn. So that suggests that it is a point of departure, this 2025. It feels like a new lunar cycle. So for all of us, wherever we are, it's about the ending of something, but also a new beginning. And we would look at this chart for further details about what this year is about. And I suppose what stands out is Jupiter. There is a Jupiter square Saturn at the beginning of the year, and it is quite a close Jupiter square Saturn. Okay, it's within a couple of degrees, and so this is a reminder that the year ahead is very much about the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. And I've talked quite a lot about the Jupiter-Saturn cycle quite recently, and the Jupiter-Saturn cycle started on, I think, December the 21st, 2020, with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Now we have this Jupiter-Saturn square, which is really connected with the whole DNA of 2025. And it's about, we had the beginning of the cycle in 2020, and now that cycle is in crisis. It's that first crisis. It's that first quarter crisis when Jupiter has moved away from Saturn and is now 90 degrees apart. And again, crisis is not necessarily a bad way of looking at things. It's just the moment where everything is starting to unfold. So at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of this Jupiter-Saturn cycle, we had COVID, and then we had the war in Ukraine, and so now it's all becoming clear, and it's perhaps going to resolve at some level. The Jupiter-Saturn square historically it's often been a time where things actually start to come together, where the where perhaps the economy comes together, and people are not really thinking that the economy can possibly come together. But as I've said, I certainly from a U.S. context, I know that Donald Trump has warned that if America's not careful, it could be heading into a great recession like 1929 and all that. I don't myself believe it. I just think this is wrong. I think this is the wrong part of the cycle. I think Jupiter-Saturn is about the cycle really starting to develop and bear fruit, and this is often we're moving on to the best part of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, and by the end of 2025, Jupiter and Saturn will be in trine. So I think from a Jupiter-Saturn perspective, this year is how it all comes together. Maybe that doesn't mean to say that the beginning of the year is not necessarily going to be difficult. I think this year could be difficult. So that gives a sort of a general view. I wanted to just very quickly look at some prior examples of years which were very dramatic to see if one really can look at an annual chart. So, for example, here is the annual chart for 1914 set for Berlin. Of course, this was the year when the First World War started. And so this is the moment the year started, Berlin time. And, of course, Libra is always going to be rising. Capricorn is always going to be on the IC. And in this chart, you can see that the Sun is moving to an opposition of Mars. So Mars was about 7 degrees short of the opposition to Mars. And of course, approximately 7 months later, the First World War started. And so I think that chart is reasonably descriptive of a year when we had war. And then we can do the same with the Second World War. This is the same thing. I set this for Warsaw, which of course the Germans invaded Poland on September the 1st, 1939. So in this chart, there is an exact Mars opposition Uranus. It's not absolutely exact, but you can see Mars is applying to an opposition of Uranus. The Moon is applying to an opposition of Mars, and then a conjunction with Uranus. So those two extreme years, and also look at Saturn on a descendant. So I think this provides some evidence that you can look at a chart for the moment the new year starts, even though there are some problems. It's very difficult to focus on particular locations because these charts are so similar. Because Libra is always going to be rising, and you're always going to have Cancer on the midheaven. So turning to 2020, which is when COVID happened. This is COVID. We have the North Node on the midheaven. At first sight, this chart doesn't necessarily seem too much of a problem, but when you open it up and look at hypothetical planets, it does become a little more dramatic. So if we put in the hypothetical planets, we can see that we had North Node conjunct Hades on the midheaven, and so I think that Hades on the midheaven does perhaps give us some indication of what the year was like, what 2020 was going to be like. I suppose you could see Hades maybe is about sickness. North Node is about contacts with other people. And I suppose in this case, with 2020, contacts with other people collapsed to nothing because people weren't in contact with each other. And so you could say to some extent that this chart for January the 1st, 2020, maybe does work. So let's just have one last look at the chart for 2025. So we don't have the kind of immediate sort of drama that we had with in the case of like the First World War or the Second World War. It doesn't seem such a spectacular chart, except the fact that Jupiter is square Saturn, but there's nothing angular except for true Black Moon Lilith. Now this might be a real test for true Black Moon Lilith. I mean, true Black Moon Lilith can be quite a sort of an unpleasant force, and so with that rising, it may be a true Black Moon Lilith kind of year, when sort of dark forces are under the surface, they're trying to manifest, and so that's perhaps something we need to watch out for. Now, as far as 2025 is in general, we do have quite a lot of important sign changes over the course of 2025. Saturn is going to move into Aries. Neptune is going to move into Aries. Uranus is going to move into Gemini. I think Uranus moves into Gemini on around July the 7th. So when you have planets crossing the Aries point, every Aries point is the world point. It represents what is happening in the world, and there is going to be a great sort of Saturn and Neptune influence here. And so there you can see in the 2025 chart that the year starts with Saturn at 14 Pisces and Neptune at 27 Pisces, and so March the 30th, Neptune goes into Aries. On May the 25th, Saturn goes into Aries. Okay, they do retrograde out of Aries, but still we're having it at the same time. And so a Saturn-Neptune as a pair, you could see this as about fear and uncertainty and just a feeling that things are not running as they should do. And of course, anyone who has 0 degrees Aries in that chart, one has to watch out for that. And also nations. I mean, I suppose, one person, for example, who might be especially affected by Saturn and Neptune moving into Aries is the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, because Justin Trudeau has his Mars at 2935 Pisces. So with those two, and he's also got Pluto. He's got a Mars-Pluto opposition. That's interesting, by the way, with Justin Trudeau. We've got a Mars-Pluto coming up over the next couple of days. So Mars-Pluto opposition coming up over the next couple of days, right at the beginning of the year. So he's likely to resonate to that Mars-Pluto energy, but still, if he can survive for the next couple of days, as I've already suggested, it may not be until Saturn and Neptune hit his Mars that he really does have to go. But it'll be interesting to see how he responds to the Mars-Pluto opposition. And another thing, we've got Uranus going into Gemini, and so Uranus going into Gemini, of course, will impact Justin Trudeau's Saturn. So he'll have Uranus on his Saturn. So it's a tough time for Justin Trudeau. And additionally, I don't know. We think about British politics. So British politics, we have the time when Starmer, the British Prime Minister Starmer, became Prime Minister. So he became Prime Minister on July the 5th, 2024. And it happened when the ascendant was 2 degrees 41 Libra. So in other words, the descendant was 241 Aries. So Mars, Saturn and Neptune later in the year are going to cross the Starmer regime's descendant. And so that, I think, is going to put him under a lot of pressure. Not just him, but I think his whole government. And I think a lot of people are predicting that Starmer is not going to last 2025, that he just doesn't have the political skills. So Saturn and Neptune in general is difficult, But I am kind of conflicted about this year because it's the right part of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. That Jupiter-Saturn square applying, not apply, the first quarter waxing square between Jupiter and Saturn is very often positive, and I know that things seem really bad economically at the moment, but I just feel that over the course of the year, in the end, there's going to be some kind of economic improvement, certainly in America, and I just don't think that we're going to get the recession or the deep recession that Donald Trump is warning about. Now, in June, Jupiter and Saturn make their final square, and I think this is quite an exceptional chart, this Jupiter-Saturn square. So here's Jupiter-Saturn square. It takes place London time, June the 15th, 2025, at 3:36 p.m. And you will see that Saturn is at 118 Aries and Jupiter is at 118 Cancer. So Jupiter has gone into Cancer. So you might see that Jupiter-Saturn square in quite an optimistic light, because you could say that Jupiter is the planet of expansion and growth and the economy developing. Saturn, on the other hand, is the planet of contraction, restriction, recession. And Jupiter in Cancer is exalted, and it's not retrograde. It's a strong Jupiter. Saturn, by contrast, is in Aries. It's in its detriment. So Jupiter is stronger than Saturn. So you could argue if Jupiter is stronger than Saturn, that might mean that growth will trump recession. Maybe it really is because of Trump. Maybe, and Trump, of course, has a Jupiter-Saturn square in his natal chart. So that is a positive way of looking at this chart. But it's kind of interesting that we have a Jupiter-Saturn square on not exactly the same day, but pretty close to. Well, it is actually the same day. It's true. We have got a Jupiter-Saturn square on the same day as a Mars-Uranus square. And that is quite exceptional. So if you wanted to point out the day in 2025 where you would most expect something incredibly dramatic to happen, it would be June the 15th. June the 15th is something that we really need to focus on. So because it's a day that we're really focusing on it, everyone's going to be focusing on it. And, as you'll see what happens over the next few months. You'll look at the YouTube videos. There are going to be lots of videos, I think, about this day, because it is so exceptional. People will say, what is happening? What's going to happen on June the 15th? Drama. So very often the case, when so many people focus on this day, actually nothing happens because there's so much focus. But still, I do think it is, at least in theory, a dangerous day, and I will be talking about June the 15th a lot more in the months to come. And I suppose we shouldn't forget that Donald Trump has his ascendant at 29 Leo, so Mars will be on Donald Trump's ascendant. Uranus will be square his ascendant. So that Mars-Uranus might have an impact on him. So that is perhaps a time he has to be careful. But overall, I think that Jupiter-Saturn dynamic may indicate that 2025, at least from an economic perspective, may not end up being as bad as many people are predicting. But I have to emphasize that specifically in the US, it's kind of, when you look at what's happening in Europe, it's kind of difficult to be optimistic. But maybe things will improve. I don't know. But if we looked at the general year for the start of 2025, going back to this chart, we see Black Moon Lilith on the ascendant. So there's certainly some nastiness in the year, but it's certainly not as dramatic as say 1939 or say 1939 or 1945. I suppose one chart I should look at is the 1929 chart, because Trump was saying, this year is going to be the year of the year of recession, and so what I was wondering what the beginning of 1929 would look like. Remember, the Wall Street crash, the Great Wall Street crash, was at the end of October. So let's just create this chart. It won't be long, just to see if we got any hints of economic disaster in 1929. So this is the chart for the beginning of 1929. And I think that you can see that this is potentially, we already know what happened in 1929, because 1929 was the Wall Street crash at the end of October. Now, there was a Mars-Neptune opposition as at the beginning of 2029. Sorry, let me. 1929. Sorry about this. I know you want to go, but let's start again. Not perhaps a super dramatic chart, I would have said. That's as always. Libra's rising. Sun is on the IC. You could say Pluto is on the midheaven. So Pluto would have been on the midheaven through a lot of charts in the 20s and 30s. You would have seen Pluto on the midheaven, or certainly through the 20s. You would have seen Pluto on the midheaven at the time of these at this time. But again, I'm not entirely convinced about this technique, but I think it's kind of worth playing with. Uranus was relatively close to the descendant at the time. Pluto relatively close to the midheaven. So maybe there was some indication there. But as far as 2025 is concerned, I don't think that Trump's pessimism as far as 2029, as far as it being like 1929 is concerned, is necessarily justified. Now, 2029, which I believe that 2029 is a bad year. I'm going to go right ahead and say, with the start of Jupiter opposition Saturn, as soon as Trump leaves office, maybe when Vance becomes president, that's when the trouble starts, because you have the beginning of that Jupiter-Saturn opposition. And in fact, that chart I accidentally showed you, I think I want to show you now, because this is the beginning of 2029. Accept this for New York, why not? So this chart, the 2029, you've got Mars close to the ascendant, Mars opposition Neptune, Neptune on the descendant, and you can see that Jupiter is moving towards that opposition of Saturn. As soon as Jupiter goes into Scorpio, Saturn in Taurus, that's when things are going to get bad. And I just think we're going to somehow the next 4 years, America will get through. America will get by. I don't know about the rest of the world, but by 2029, I think that I've headed it 1929, but this is a chart for 2029. So I think we've got 4 years before things get really bad economically. Anyway, sorry to have been a bit all over the place with that. I will be more coherent, I hope, in my thoughts about 2025 in future videos. So thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would of course be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So yeah, thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.